The warning didn't arrive like a threat. It arrived like certainty. No distortion, no delay. No origin point that sensors could trace or algorithms could unravel. It simply appeared simultaneously everywhere. Across the Galactic Council's networks, across military command vessels, across deep space observatories that had spent centuries mapping the predictable silence of the cosmos. Every screen shifted, every channel aligned. Every system, no matter how ancient or advanced, paused just long enough to receive it. A single line: do not engage. Leave the system immediately. There was no signature attached, no encryption, no layered diplomacy disguised as caution, just raw intent stripped down to its core. For a fraction of a moment, so small it barely registered, something unusual happened inside the Council's vast data cores. A hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty buried beneath layers of certainty built over millennia. Then it was gone, because the Council did not fear warnings. They cataloged them, studied them, archived them alongside countless others issued by species that had once believed themselves capable of resistance. Warnings were predictable, almost ceremonial, the last act of a civilization before it was brought into alignment. And humanity had not yet earned the right to be taken seriously. In the great chamber orbiting a distant star, where decisions shaped entire sectors of existence, the transmission was replayed, not for clarity, but for confirmation. Delegates of impossible forms absorbed it in silence. Beings of plasma pulsed faintly. Crystalline minds refracted its meaning into cold, logical conclusions. Entities that existed only as patterns in space-time registered it and dismissed it. Primitive defiance, one voice concluded, layered and ancient. Emotional response, another added. A predictable stage before compliance. There was no debate, no extended analysis, because the outcome had already been decided long before the message arrived. Beyond the chamber, fleets had already begun their approach. Fast-ordered, unstoppable. They moved not with urgency, but with inevitability, the kind that came from knowing the end of the story before the first move was made. And yet, far away on a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable star, something else was happening. Not panic, not chaos. Preparation. Deep beneath oceans, inside silent facilities carved into stone and secrecy, systems awakened that had never been meant to see the light of day. Power surged through networks that had no official record. Signals moved through channels no one had ever mapped. Humanity did not repeat the warning. It did not escalate the message, because it had already said everything it needed to say. Back in orbit, aboard the Council's forward command vessels, the transmission faded from primary displays, relegated to background logs, its significance downgraded to negligible. A warning ignored. A system about to be stabilized. Everything proceeding exactly as expected. But expectation was the one variable humanity had never followed. The eminence of order did not drift through space. It dominated it. A structure so vast it seemed less like a ship and more like a declaration. Layered spires of luminous alloy rising in impossible symmetry, each surface bending starlight into controlled brilliance. It hovered above Earth with perfect stillness, its shadow stretching across the curve of the planet like a silent crown placed upon something that had not asked to be ruled. Around it, the fleet formed. Thousands of vessels, each one a masterpiece of ancient engineering, aligned in flawless geometry. Their positions were not random, not tactical in the human sense. They were mathematical. Every angle, every distance calculated for maximum control, maximum efficiency. A system not of war, but of certainty. Below them, Earth turned. Clouds drifted over oceans that had never known this kind of attention. Cities pulsed with fragile light, unaware, or unwilling to fully understand just how small they appeared from this height. It was beautiful in a way that almost justified preserving it. Almost. On the observation deck, Commander Aristel stood with his hands clasped behind his back, gaze fixed on the world beneath him. The glass before him wasn't glass at all, just a controlled absence of matter, allowing an unobstructed view of the planet hanging in the void. He had overseen dozens of integrations before. Entire species brought into alignment under the Council's design. Some had resisted. Most had not. All had eventually understood. They were given time, an advisor said quietly from behind him. The being's form shimmered, part energy, part structure, its voice layered with harmonic precision. Multiple cycles, multiple opportunities for compliance. Eris didn't look away from Earth. Yes, he replied, and they used it? Poorly. His tone held no anger, no frustration, just evaluation. Because from the Council's perspective, humanity's problem wasn't defiance. It was inconsistency, growth that didn't stabilize, innovation that outpaced control, a tendency to push beyond boundaries without first asking whether those boundaries should exist at all, unpredictable variables. In a system that depended on predictability, below something flickered across the night side of the planet, city lights pulsing in irregular patterns. Not unusual, not threatening, just different enough to draw the eye. Eris narrowed his gaze slightly. For a moment, something in the rhythm felt off. Then it passed. Behind him, the command deck hummed with quiet efficiency. Data streams flowed in layered holographic arcs, each one confirming what the Council already believed. Earth had no capacity to resist in any meaningful way. No fleet large enough, no weapons capable of challenging what now surrounded it. Final integration protocols are ready, another voice reported. All systems prepared for phased enforcement. Eris inclined his head once. Proceed on schedule. There was no urgency. No need to rush what was already inevitable. Far below, storms rolled across the oceans, lightning flickering in silent bursts, raw, untamed energy dancing across a world that still believed it belonged to itself. Eris watched it all with calm detachment. They warned us, the advisor said after a moment, referencing the earlier transmission. Eris allowed the faintest shift in expression, not quite a smile, not quite anything human would recognize. Yes, he said, a pause. They did. His eyes remained on the planet as the fleet tightened its formation ever so slightly, subtle, precise, like a net drawing closer without ever needing to be seen as one. Because from where he stood, there was nothing Earth could do that would change what came next. The first sign wasn't an explosion. It was a disappearance. On the outer edge of the Council's formation, a surveillance satellite, one of thousands, blinked off the grid. No damage report, no debris, no signal decay. One moment it existed, the next it simply didn't. At first it was dismissed. A minor fluctuation, a rounding error in a system that prided itself on perfection. Then another vanished. And another. Within seconds, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Confirming loss of peripheral units. An officer reported, his voice controlled but tightening at the edges. No energy signatures detected. No hostile activity. They're just gone. On the observation deck, Aristel didn't move. His gaze remained fixed on Earth, but his focus had shifted inward, calculating, recalibrating, searching for a framework that made sense of what he was hearing. Run full spectrum analysis, he ordered. Already in progress. The response came too quickly. Too prepared. That was the first crack. Across the fleet, instruments began to disagree with each other. Distance readings fluctuated. Coordinates drifted by fractions that shouldn't exist. Ships reported being in two places at once, then neither. Not errors, contradictions. Gravitational variance detected, another voice cut in. Localized distortions forming across multiple sectors. How localized? Eris asked. A pause. System-wide. The words settled like a weight in the air. Eris turned slightly now, his attention fully drawn to the expanding data projections. The holographic map of the system flickered. Stable one moment, fragmented the next. Orbital paths twisted subtly, like threads being pulled out of alignment by unseen hands. Source? He demanded. Silence answered him first. Not because there was no data, but because the data refused to agree with itself. Then finally, Earth. The answer felt wrong even as it was spoken. Too simple. Too small. Eris stepped closer to the display, his reflection overlapping with a planet that still looked unchanged. Oceans turned. Clouds moved. Cities glowed. There were no weapons. No fleets rising to meet them. No visible sign of resistance. And yet everything was shifting. On the far side of the formation, a cruiser reported sudden displacement, its position jumping several kilometers without any measurable acceleration. Another vessel attempted to compensate, only for its engines to misfire as local constants fluctuated beyond operational tolerances. Stabilizers failing, no. Recalibrating, no. The transmission cut mid-sentence. Gone, not destroyed, removed. A ripple of unease moved through the fleet, not panic, not yet. But something unfamiliar, something that didn't belong in a system built on certainty. "Commander," an advisor said, its usually steady tone now carrying a faint distortion. "We are detecting inconsistencies in baseline physics. Minor deviations, but increasing." Eris's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Increasing how?" Another pause. "Exponentially." Below them, Earth remained silent. Too silent. No retaliatory message. No escalation. Not even an attempt to communicate. Just that same quiet world, turning beneath them as if nothing had changed. But something had. Eris could feel it now, not through instruments, not through data, but through instinct. A subtle pressure like standing too close to something vast and unseen. "They warned us," the advisor said again, more quietly this time. Eris didn't respond immediately, because for the first time since the operation began, he wasn't certain what they had ignored. The second transmission didn't arrive through their systems. It arrived through everything. Not as sound, not as signal. As a shift. Across the Council fleet, calculations began to fail. Not gradually, not with warning, but all at once. Equations that had governed navigation for thousands of years collapsed into contradictions. Orbital paths twisted into impossible curves. Distance lost meaning. Points that should have been fixed began to drift as if space itself had forgotten how to hold its shape. "Report," Eris demanded, his voice cutting through the rising tension on the command deck. No one answered immediately. Not because they didn't have data, because the data made no sense. "Fundamental constants are fluctuating," an officer finally said, each word forced through disbelief. "Not locally, not regionally, system-wide." Another voice broke in sharper. "Electromagnetic baselines are deviating. Quantum states are overlapping," a third finished. The word hung there. Overlapping. Impossible. Eris stepped forward, his gaze snapping back to the viewport. Earth filled the horizon, unchanged, untouched, deceptively calm. Then the sky above it, fractured. At first it looked like light. Thin lines, faint and geometric, rising from the surface in perfect, deliberate angles. They spread outward, intersecting, weaving into a lattice that stretched from atmosphere to orbit. Not chaotic, not explosive, precise. "Visual anomaly confirmed," someone whispered. But it wasn't an anomaly. It was structure. The lattice grew, expanding beyond the planet, threading through space with a logic no council system could interpret. It connected points that didn't exist on any known map, forming patterns that extended beyond 3 dimensions, shapes that seemed to fold in on themselves, then unfold into something larger. Eris felt it then. Not fear, recognition. "This isn't a weapon," he said quietly. "Because weapons destroyed. Weapons obeyed rules. This did neither." Back on the tactical displays, fleet positions began to distort. Ships flickered, not vanishing, but misaligning, appearing slightly out of place, as if reality had shifted around them without permission. "Containment fields failing. Navigation is non-functional. Coordinates are no longer stable. Commander, we're losing reference points." Eris raised a hand, not to silence them, but because he already understood. Humanity hadn't responded with force. They had responded with change. Deep beneath Earth's surface, unseen and untraceable, something ancient in design but new in execution had come online. Not built to fight within the universe, but to rewrite how the universe behaved within its reach. An override, a system that didn't challenge the Council's power. It bypassed it entirely. The lattice surged brighter, its lines sharpening, locking into place. Space around it bent, not violently, but with quiet authority, as if a new framework had been introduced and everything else was being forced to adapt. Ships closest to the structure began to drift, not by motion but by displacement. Their positions shifting in ways no engine could replicate. Some flickered at the edges, their forms stretching into states that couldn't be maintained. "We're losing them," an officer said, his voice barely holding. "Not destroyed, just removed." Eris clenched his jaw, his certainty unraveling piece by piece. The warning replayed in his mind, clear, direct, undeniable. "Do not engage." He had dismissed it. They all had. Now standing at the center of a system that no longer obeyed the laws they had mastered, he finally understood the weight behind it. This wasn't resistance. It wasn't rebellion. It was something far more dangerous. Humanity hadn't prepared to defend itself. It had prepared to make defense irrelevant. The fleet didn't break. It unraveled. One moment the Galactic Council's armada held perfect formation, an unshakable lattice of power refined over ages. The next, that precision fractured, not under force but under contradiction. "Stabilize positions," Aris barked, gripping the command rail as the deck beneath him hummed with rising instability. But there was nothing to stabilize. Coordinates no longer held meaning. Distance stretched, folded, collapsed into itself. Ships that had been kilometers apart now overlapped in sensor space, ghosting through each other without collision, without resistance, as if they occupied different versions of the same reality. Navigation is non-functional. Engine outputs are fluctuating. No, they're decoupling from space. Commander, we're losing structural coherence in outer sectors. The reports stacked on top of each other, breaking down into noise as systems designed for certainty collided with something that refused to be defined. Outside the viewport, the lattice burned brighter. It no longer resembled light. It resembled intent. Lines of impossible geometry locked into place around Earth, extending outward in vast interwoven patterns. They didn't expand randomly, they targeted. Not ships. Not weapons. The rules those ships depended on. A cruiser at the edge of the formation fired its containment field, a shimmering barrier capable of absorbing stellar-level impacts. It activated perfectly, for a fraction of a second. Then it simply ceased to exist, not broken, not overloaded, irrelevant. Defensive systems are being bypassed at the conceptual level, an analyst whispered, his voice hollow. It's not penetrating them. It's making them unnecessary. Aris felt the words settle like ice, because that meant there was nothing to adapt, nothing to counter. This wasn't a battlefield. It was a rewrite. "Retreat," he ordered. The word cut through the chaos, but even as it was spoken, he knew how useless it sounded. Retreat required direction, required distance. Both had just been taken away. Engines roared to life across the fleet, vessels attempting to break formation, to pull away from the expanding lattice. But space itself betrayed them. Paths elongated into infinity, trajectories curved back on themselves. Ships accelerated, and arrived nowhere, trapped not by walls, by definition. "Commander, look!" Aris turned back to the viewport. A section of the fleet, dozens of ships, flickered violently. Their forms stretched, fragmented into overlapping silhouettes. For a brief, terrifying moment, they existed in multiple states at once. Then they were gone. No explosion, no residue, just absence, a silence where something had once been certain. Aris's breath tightened. For the first time in centuries of command, he felt something unfamiliar rising beneath his control. Fear. "Open a channel," he said, his voice lower now, stripped of certainty. A pause, then, "Channel open." The response came immediately, not delayed, not distorted, as if it had been waiting. A human voice filled the command deck, calm, steady, almost patient. "You were told to leave." No anger, no triumph, just truth delivered without urgency. Aris swallowed, his gaze fixed on the lattice as it continued to reshape the system around them. "We request disengagement," he said carefully, each word measured. For the first time, he wasn't giving an order. He was asking. A moment passed. Then the voice returned unchanged. "The system is no longer governed by your rules." The lattice surged, and the Council fleet, once the embodiment of control, was forced into the only position it had never prepared for. Helplessness. The silence that followed wasn't victory. It was permission. Across the fractured expanse of the Sol system, what remained of the Galactic Council fleet pulled back, not in formation, not with discipline, but with something dangerously close to urgency. Ships that could still move did so without elegance, slipping through warped corridors of space that only barely resembled escape routes. Others lingered at the edges of the lattice, their forms unstable, their systems clinging to definitions that no longer fully applied. No one fired. No one dared. Because the battlefield itself had changed sides. From orbit, Earth glowed beneath the fading lattice, blue and quiet, as if nothing had happened at all. The impossible geometry that had once pierced the sky now softened, its lines dissolving one by one, retreating not outward, but inward, folding back into the planet like a thought being withdrawn. It left no scars, no debris, only absence. On the eminence of order, Commander Aristal stood in stillness as system after system struggled to reassert baseline function. Data streams stabilized, slowly, reluctantly, like reality itself was remembering how to behave. Around him, the command deck had fallen silent, not by protocol, not by design, by understanding. "We are clear of the distortion field," an officer reported, voice unsteady. "Remaining vessels accounted for. Partial losses confirmed." Partial. The word felt inadequate. Eris didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on Earth, on that same fragile world they had come to correct, to contain, to guide into alignment. Now it felt distant. Not in space, in reach. "Attempting re-entry vectors," another voice said. "Navigation systems recalibrated. We should be able to—" No. The word left Eris before the thought fully formed. The officer froze. "Commander?" Harris exhaled slowly, the weight of realization settling deeper with each passing second. "Stand down," he said quietly. "We will not re-engage, because this was no longer a system they understood, and understanding had always been their greatest advantage. Without it, they were guessing, and guessing was how civilizations ended." Days later, far from the Sol system, the Galactic Council reconvened. The great chamber, once filled with unshakable certainty, now carried something unfamiliar. Hesitation, fractures in consensus, calculations that no longer aligned as cleanly as they once had. They reviewed the data, again and again, each time arriving at the same conclusion. Earth had not defeated them. It had removed itself from the equation entirely. A variable no longer subject to their models. A system no longer governed by their rules. "Recommendation?" one voice asked, quieter than such voices had ever been. For a long moment no one answered. Then Aris stepped forward, not as a commander now, but as a witness. "We adapt," he said, a pause, "and we request dialogue." The chamber stilled. Request. The word felt foreign, heavy, necessary. Across the void, toward a system they could no longer approach without consequence, the transmission was prepared. Not a command, not a directive. A message, simple, direct, humble. "We wish to negotiate." It was sent. And for the first time in the history of the Council, there was no guarantee it would be answered.